They killed my team, Sarah Kane screamed in the grip of a nightmare, sweat soaking her skin. The former Navy SEAL snapped awake, clutching the Barrett .50 that lay beside her bed. It wasn't just a rifle, but the last fragment of memory from Task Force Phantom, the non-existent unit she once served with. On its cold steel frame, the faintly carved letters still haunted her every night. For a decade, Sarah lived like a shadow until the day a mysterious agent appeared, placing a dossier in front of her. He asked, "What really happened with Phantom? If you walk away from this story now, you'll miss the most shocking confession ever from a unit that was never supposed to exist." The dark garage echoed only with the steady drip of water falling onto the stained cement floor. On a worn wooden table lay oil-soaked rags mottled with dark patches, beside a neat row of old cartridges lined up like metallic tombstones. Sarah Kane sat motionless, her eyes fixed on the Barrett .50 resting before her. The rifle was long, cold, heavy, just like the memories she had spent a decade trying to bury. Dim light swept across the scratched steel surface, revealing 3 faint letters, TF, P Phantom. They were like scars carved into flesh, never to heal. Sarah raised her hand, running her finger gently along the engraving. Gun oil clung to her skin, icy to the touch, yet deep in her palm it burned hot, as if the blood of her teammates still seeped from years past. The garage door swung open. Texas night air rushed in, carrying the scent of smoke, dust, and dampness. A tall, lean figure stepped inside, his gray suit pressed sharp, almost absurdly out of place in the worn, grimy setting. He placed a thin dossier on the table with deliberate weight. It slid across the wood and came to rest before the barrel of the Barrett, like a challenge. When Sarah opened it, the first page was an old photograph. Her clad in desert camouflage, Barrett slung over her shoulder, the Phantom engraving faintly visible on the stock. The image struck like a slap to the mind. She had believed every trace had been erased from reports, journals, even from the memories of those who once stood beside her. And yet, somehow, someone had kept a fragment of the truth. The man needed no introduction, no persuasion. The way he laid down the file, the cold certainty in his eyes, said everything. He hadn't come here by chance. He didn't have to shout, didn't have to accuse. He simply left silence enough for Sarah to hear her own heartbeat pounding like war drums inside the narrow garage. In that silence, Sarah's hand tightened around the rifle's grip. Her gaze was sharp, but beneath it brewed a storm long restrained. She had left it all behind: comrades, glory, even the very name Phantom. But the appearance of that photo was like someone prying open a coffin, exposing what was meant to sleep. Memories flooded back uninvited. A night in Pakistan, moonless, the wind shrieking through the mountains. The radio crackled, then the order, retreat. It rang like thunder, splitting her skull. Sarah remembered screaming, but the gunfire drowned everything. The team was surrounded, bullets rained like fire. She saw a teammate fall, eyes still open, still smiling. She saw herself crawling through a pool of blood, clawing toward escape in the chaos. Then, silence. Only her. A bead of cold sweat dropped onto the back of her hand, mixing with gun oil. Sarah inhaled sharply, forcing herself back to the present. Across from her, the man sat with probing eyes that seemed to pierce through, as if he too was watching that blood-soaked battle through her gaze. He asked little. Only one dry, cutting sentence echoed through the garage like a verdict. Why is a weapon issued only to Phantom in your hands? No more words were needed. Sarah understood. This wasn't about a rifle, nor about a faint engraving. It was about existence, or non-existence, of a unit the Pentagon had tried to bury. Her eyes stayed on the photo. In her head, 1,000 questions screamed. How did he know? Who had kept this file? And most of all, if everything had been erased, why was the name Phantom now knocking on her door? The cramped room seemed to shrink, pressing in heavy. The old ceiling fan creaked, joining the tick of the clock, stretching the moment of confrontation into a frozen tableau. Sarah knew that from the instant that photograph surfaced, she was no longer just a nameless veteran in a dusty garage. She had been summoned back to the battlefield, not one of sand and bullets, but of secrets and hidden hands. And in that moment, as her eyes locked with his, Sarah wondered, was this the beginning of the truth being unearthed, or merely the opening move of a new hunt with her as the prey? A business card slid lightly across the wooden table, stopping right under the sickly yellow glow of a fluorescent bulb. The embossed letters stood out clear. Special Agent Robert Hayes, Defense Intelligence Agency. In the old garage, heavy with oil and dust, that stiff piece of paper felt like a small crack in a thick wall of silence, warning of an earthquake about to break. Hayes did not rush. He lowered himself into the metal chair opposite, adjusting his glasses as though the grimy air of this place didn't bother him in the least. That unhurried gesture, to Sarah's eyes, carried the weight of someone long accustomed to placing the lives of others on the scale. He exhaled not the weary sigh of a bureaucrat, but the breath of a man so burdened with secrets that each time he revealed a sliver, it was like pulling the oxygen out of the room. The Barrett .50 still lay there, dominating the table like a silent witness. Hayes tilted his head toward it, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. Then he spoke, low and steady, his voice more verdict than statement. Sarah wasn't the only one who had survived Phantom, but she was the only one they had found. And that Barrett it had never been issued to anyone outside Phantom's sniper team. Sarah sat rigid, her back straight as if strapped to the chair. The words hit like a muffled shot, shattering the last walls she had built over 10 long years. Every brick of memory she had stacked to keep the past at bay cracked and fell. Hayes opened the file, each movement deliberate, almost cruel. Inside were old photographs, paper yellowed and fragile, as if dragged from some archive buried deep underground. Phantom 7 figures stood amid dust and shadow. Every face had been blacked out with ink, every face but one. One pair of eyes remained intact, Sarah's. Those eyes, staring back at her from the photo, were not the eyes of a retired woman living hidden away in Texas. They were the eyes of a sniper, of someone who knew that each time she peered through a scope, she stared into death, her target's peace, and possibly her own. The air tightened, drawn taut like a guitar string ready to snap. Hayes closed the file, the dry thud of cardboard against wood echoing like the cut of a blade. His voice shed any softness, turning sharp and cold. Task Force Phantom had never existed, but if the truth were exposed, there were men in government who would lose everything. In that instant, Sarah understood. For years she had believed her pain was hers alone, a scar no one could see, no one would believe. But now, it was not a faded memory, not a ghost she kept locked away. It was a double-edged blade, suspended above many heads, and her very existence, however quiet, was enough to let it fall. The garage suddenly felt too small. The ticking of the clock cut through the stillness, mingling with the whistle of wind through the doorframe. Sarah's eyes fell to the Barrett, remembering every night she had cleaned it, clinging to the ritual as proof that the past had closed. Yet now she saw it plainly. The rifle had never been the past. It was living evidence, a key to the door sealed behind thousands of layers of secrecy. She leaned back, gaze still locked on the file. Each photo, each scrap of paper, was an invisible hand dragging her back to that night in Pakistan. That night, Phantom dissolved not because the enemy was stronger, but because of a senseless order to retreat. She remembered the chill racing her spine, remembered the muffled cries of teammates drowned in smoke and dust. Hayes watched her in silence, as though knowing persuasion was useless. He didn't need her belief. He had just handed her the one thing no veteran could deny: acknowledgement from authority. And that acknowledgement was the breaking point. It transformed what Sarah had kept buried in her heart into a reality she could no longer reject. A small part of her wanted to laugh at the irony. For 10 years she had struggled to convince herself Phantom was real, that her pain wasn't imagined. And now, with a DIA agent confirming it, she felt like a bird pulled out of a dark cage, realizing the open sky above was full of traps. There was nothing sweet in that confirmation, only the weight of a warning. And to Sarah, it rang as clear as a siren on a battlefield. From now on, every step she took would be watched. But there was something else. If Hayes spoke the truth, if she wasn't the only one, then which teammate had survived, and why had only she been found? The question hung sharp in her mind like a gleaming blade, twisting deeper, forcing her to face the inevitable. Would the secrets still hidden in the dark save her or bury her once again? Dear audience, grab a glass of water, take a moment to relax, and keep listening to the story. The twists are still to come. And please drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always a joy to see who's joining us from around the world. Drop a 1 in the comments if you find this story gripping so we can keep bringing you more captivating tales. The wind that howled through the Hindu Kush carried with it the frozen breath of death. That night, the sky was pitch black, thick as spilled ink, with only a faint crescent moon clinging to the jagged cliffs. The valley lay in silence so still that Sarah Kane could hear the thud of her own heartbeat beneath her armor, beating in rhythm with the steady breaths of the 6 teammates at her back. Task Force Phantom was born in darkness and lived only in darkness. No flag, no uniform, no trace on paper. They existed like the cold breath of night, their only mission to hunt the targets the government would never admit were on any list. In their world, honor came not from medals, but from never being spoken of. Sarah was only 28 at the time, too young perhaps to carry a 30-pound Barrett on her shoulders for miles, but old enough to know she had stepped into a world with no way out. She was one of the very few women who had made it through the brutal selection. Her skill with the Barrett .50 exceeded SOCOM standards so thoroughly that one instructor had once half-joked, "If the devil himself shows up on the horizon, just put Sarah on the rooftop, she'll send him back to hell with a single shot." Her teammates called her the guardian angel, the angel of protection with steel eyes behind the scope. The mission that day had seemed textbook. Surround a hidden compound where a high-value Al-Qaeda target was holed up. Phantom moved in silence, their bodies blending into dust and shadow. Sarah took the high ground, prone behind her scope, watching the camp from afar. Her heart beat its familiar rhythm, tense, focused, yet oddly calm, as if the whole world had shrunk down to her crosshairs. Then the order came. The commander's voice crackled through the radio, dry and blunt. Retreat. Abort the target. At first, Sarah thought she had misheard. The enemy was only a few hundred meters away, the perimeter sealed tight. She had already locked the target, her finger ready on the trigger. But instead of fire, they were told to pull back. That moment of hesitation was enough to turn night into hell. Bullets tore through the air, screaming like fireworks of death. Grenades exploded in sand, rocks and dirt pelting her face. Phantom was swallowed whole by fire. Sarah remembered it with brutal clarity. Corporal Jason Reed, the team scout, falling right in front of her. Eyes still open, still shining with a fragile trust. Blood spread across his chest faster than she could press her hands to stop it. She tried to drag him back, but the torrent of gunfire hammered down like a storm of steel, forcing her into the rocks. A shard of shrapnel ripped through her shoulder, pain so sharp she thought her bone had shattered. Her body felt like lead, but instinct drove her forward. She crawled past her fallen comrades, through the stench of gunpowder, blood, and wet earth thick enough to twist her gut. Every movement was a bargain with death. Through the radio, familiar voices vanished one by one, screams, names shouted into chaos, then silence. When the last signal cut out, Sarah realized she was the only fragment left in the firestorm. By morning, the sun rose over the valley. Sarah opened her eyes to find her knees stiff in a crust of dried blood. There was no one left. No reinforcements, no helicopters, no rescue signal. Only stone, sand, and lifeless arms stretched across the ground. She dragged herself for 4 days through ravines, across shifting sands, living on rainwater and scraps of rations. Each night she thought it would be her last. Each morning somehow she woke again. At one point, delirious with fever, she even laughed at herself. Maybe the devil just fell asleep and forgot to take me. When she finally staggered back to base, her clothes in tatters, her body more ghost than flesh, she wasn't met with the embrace of comrades. Instead, she saw the cold stare of the duty officer. The report read, "Task Force Phantom does not exist. Every file erased. No record of the mission, no names of her team, not even proof she had been there." The deepest wound wasn't in her body. It was the absolute denial. She had lost her team, her family, and now she had lost even the proof they had ever lived. A soldier's entire life snapped in silence. From that moment on, Sarah knew she was no longer a warrior in uniform. She was only a shadow, carrying memories no one acknowledged, surviving when no one wanted her to. Phantom, the unit that had been her faith and honor, was now nothing more than a faint engraving on the side of a Barrett. And yet, even under forced oblivion, Sarah carried one question that haunted her every night. That order to retreat, was it truly a mistake, or a trap laid to wipe out the entire team? The Texas night was so quiet that even the sound of insects seemed to echo from another world. Sarah Kane thought she had grown used to that silence after 10 years in hiding. But that evening, the pale blue glow of her laptop screen lit her face inside the garage, exposing lines etched deeper than all her years in uniform. She had only meant to check an old mechanics forum, where gearheads traded tricks on resurrecting rusted engines. But then a strange link appeared in her anonymous inbox. A single, unconscious click dragged her into a black hole from which light no longer found an easy way out. On the screen appeared a leaked document from the dark web. The title was written in a cold, blunt font, "Purge Target List." Sarah's heart pounded like a hammer. She scrolled, eyes locked on every line. Names she didn't know, some she had vaguely heard during her service years. And then, her pulse froze when she saw the familiar one, Sarah Kane. Her photo appeared, not an old military shot, but a recent image, pulled straight from her Texas driver's license. A bright red circle enclosed her face, with a short note, "Traitor, must be eliminated." The garage, already cramped, seemed to close in, the concrete walls pressing against her chest. Sarah pushed her chair back, her hand instinctively reaching for the Barrett, survival reflex. She had been hunted before in battlefields, but never imagined that even after walking away, she was still squarely in the crosshairs. The sensation of being exposed slammed into her mind. No place safe enough, no false identity thick enough to hide behind. Someone, somewhere, had been watching her for years, waiting for the moment to drag her name back into the light. That night, as Sarah forced herself to lie down, a faint sound stirred outside the garage. Metal scraped lightly, barely a whisper, but enough to jolt her upright. The window was cracked, the darkness beyond devouring every detail. Her hand stretched, the Barrett already loaded. Her movements were quick, precise muscle memory that had never abandoned her. The scope swept the night, searching for motion. For an instant, she caught a shadow sliding past the tree line, swift and silent, moving the way she once had during Black Ops missions. She snapped on her tactical flashlight, slicing the dark with a harsh beam. The light revealed only bare earth, an empty patch of ground, with a single spent casing and deep boot prints pressed into damp soil. The message was unmistakable. "We know where you are. We can get in any time, and we'll be back." Sarah lowered the Barrett, but her chest still pounded like she was mid-mission. Sweat dripped down her temple, tracing her cheek before breaking against her jaw. Her mind reeled with questions. Who was behind the list? Why now? And most of all, why erase her after all these years? In the side mirror of the old pickup parked outside, she caught her reflection, a middle-aged woman with hollow eyes clutching the Barrett as if it were the last reason she still breathed. She gave herself a bitter smile, half weary, half mocking. Phantom never existed, huh? Then why the hell are they still hunting its ghost? The night dragged heavy, but Sarah knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just a warning. This was the opening shot of a hunt. Whoever sent that signal didn't care that she had vanished for 10 years, didn't care that she tried to become no one. To them, Sarah was not a washed-up mechanic in Texas. She was the last living witness of Task Force Phantom, and that made her a target marked for elimination. By dawn, the garage still reeked of gun oil and powder. Sarah sat in silence, staring at the crack of light spilling through the door. She knew now. The ghosts of Pakistan had never slept. And tonight, they had returned not as memories, but as predators of flesh and bone. Only one question remained, burning sharper than all the rest. Would she keep running, or return to what Phantom had been born to do, stand and fight? The smell of roasted coffee filled the air, rich and sharp, mingling with the sweetness of pastries and the grinding whir of a machine. It seemed like just another morning in the Texas suburbs, where people came only to start their day with a cappuccino and a few casual words. But in the corner of the small cafe, by a fogged-up window, a meeting was taking place, a meeting Sarah Kane had never imagined would come. She sat still, her back pressed against the wooden chair, eyes fixed on the empty parking lot outside. Her hand clutched the coffee cup so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The image of the spent casing from last night, the boot prints fading into the darkness, still haunted her, clinging to her like a shadow that refused to be shaken. When the cafe door creaked open, the chime ringing above, Sarah didn't need to look. She knew. Hayes had arrived. But he wasn't alone. A younger man in a dark blue suit followed. His stride was quick, his eyes scanning every exit, every customer, as though memorizing potential threats. That kind of movement could only belong to someone who lived in a world where danger lurked in every corner, an FBI agent. An envelope was placed on the table, thin yet crushing, pressing against her chest like a slab of stone. Sarah opened it. Satellite images unfolded, red marks pinpointing hidden locations across the Middle East. A map lined with complex connections, like a spiderweb spun by invisible hands. And at last, printed emails, fragments of words, but when pieced together, they formed a grim picture. A defense contractor. Backroom deals. Massive payments hidden beneath layers of bureaucratic language. All of it led to one chilling conclusion. The Phantom Massacre in 2012 was no mistake. It was a move in a game that had been rigged from the start. Sarah felt sweat slick her palms. She reread each line, every sentence a bullet driven into her chest. For years she had asked herself whether that retreat order had been a tactical blunder or something darker. Now the answer stared back at her. Phantom had been sacrificed. Her teammates had died for lucrative contracts, for someone in power to climb another rung up the ladder. A bitter rage swelled, followed quickly by a heavy emptiness. Sarah had survived, but survived for what? For 10 years she had been nothing but a shadow, buried in machines, an exile in her own country. And now, all that loss was revealed to be a mere fragment of a power play by men who had never set foot on a battlefield. The FBI agent sat quietly, sparing his words. His eyes, steady and unyielding, carried a message without speaking. She was the only piece left that could flip the board. Hayes leaned back, his worn face drawn even heavier. For a moment, the three of them sat in silence, the clink of spoons against cups from other patrons ringing as clear as gunfire. Sarah clenched her fists. Images from Pakistan surged back, Jason Reed collapsing, eyes still trusting, the voices of her teammates vanishing into static on the radio. They had trusted her, believed she would protect them, that if anyone survived, at least one person would tell their story. Instead, she had stayed silent for a decade, letting their memories be erased from every record. Now, that old guilt burned into fire. This wasn't just an opportunity, this was the last chance for redemption. If she refused, Phantom would forever remain a name that never existed, and her teammates' deaths would dissolve into dust. She exhaled, leaning back, eyes drifting across the cafe. People laughed, sipped their drinks, carried on unaware that at this small table the truth had the power to shake the tallest buildings in Washington. For a fleeting second, Sarah thought how strange it was that the justice of such a powerful nation could begin with a thin paper envelope in a suburban coffee shop. A faint smile flickered on her lips, touched with bitterness, touched with irony. Perhaps Phantom wasn't dead, not in military files, but alive in her heart, in the fire that had smoldered and now blazed again. When she folded the envelope closed, Sarah knew she had crossed a threshold. Once again, she was a warrior, not fighting for faceless orders from above, but to claim justice for those who had fallen. But even then, one thought struck her, cold as night air. If they knew she had agreed, would she have enough time to fulfill that promise? Or would she become the very first target in this new game? The heavy metal door screeched open, its cold echo spreading through the hollow emptiness of an abandoned freezer warehouse. A burst of icy air rushed out, wrapping around Sarah Kane like an invisible hand. She stepped inside, her boots clanging against the concrete floor glazed with a thin layer of frost. Each step reminded her this wasn't a dream, but a real meeting, the one the FBI had arranged, without telling her what waited on the other side. For a moment, Sarah felt something unsettlingly familiar. The skin-splitting cold, the metallic tang in the air, the suffocating sense of anticipation. It all dragged her back to that fateful night in Pakistan. Her heartbeat quickened, part memory, part fear that behind this door might not be answers, but a trap. And then the figure appeared. Out of the shadows, a man stepped forward, gaunt, hair streaked with gray, eyes hardened like someone who had walked through hell and come back. Sarah froze. Her chest jolted, as if someone had fired a Barrett round right beside her ear. Standing before her was Corporal Jason Reed, the phantom scout she had seen fall in the 2012 ambush. For seconds, Sarah thought she was hallucinating. Jason's blood-soaked body, eyes wide open, had haunted her every night for a decade. But now, Jason stood there, trembling, real enough that she could hear the ragged wheeze of his breath. He didn't speak at first. Slowly, he held out a silver hard drive, its scratched casing heavy as though dug out of the earth itself. Sarah reached for it, her hand shaking uncontrollably. Inside that drive, Jason gave a faint nod, was the truth. Contracts, documents, emails, dry lines of text, yet powerful enough to set Washington ablaze. Phantom hadn't been killed by enemy fire. Phantom had been sold out. Someone had taken money from a weapons conglomerate in exchange for the lives of 7 men and women. Heat rushed to Sarah's face. A decade of buried pain erupted, boiling into a fury she could barely contain. Every question she had carried for 10 years, the retreat order, the vanishing from records, now answered, and the answer was more poisonous than any wound. Phantom hadn't died to war. Phantom had died to betrayal, Americans betrayed by Americans. Jason slumped into a broken chair, his eyes staring at some distant emptiness, as if still reliving that night in Pakistan. He had survived, but not to live, only to carry the truth like an anchor around his neck. His words came slow, heavy, each one slicing open the silence. If this truth came into the light, it would burn the Pentagon to its foundations. But if it stayed buried, more phantoms would be sacrificed to feed the game of power. Sarah gripped the drive, the cold biting through her arm. She remembered every face, teammates who laughed with her in tents, shared rations, staked their lives on the aim of her Barrett. Now they existed only in memory and in these files. A part of her wanted to collapse. For years she had tried to forget, to run, and now the truth shoved her back onto the same road. Another part of her wanted to laugh laugh at the cruel irony. Phantom wasn't in the records, but its ghost now had the power to make the mighty tremble. Jason lifted his head, eyes meeting Sarah's mon. In that gaze was a fragile hope that she wouldn't run this time, that Phantom would live again through the truth. Sarah drew a deep breath. She didn't know where this path would end, or how much time she had before the people behind the kill list came for her. But she knew one thing. The moment she held this drive, she was already at the center of a new war. The cold of the warehouse no longer made her shiver. Fear had given way to resolve. Phantom had once been buried in darkness. But now, perhaps it was the darkness that would learn to tremble before the light of truth. Sarah gave a faint nod, clutching the hard drive tight. And the only question echoing in her mind was, would she have the strength to bring this truth into the light before the system swallowed her whole once again? Late at night, the wind swept through the Texas town as if it meant to erase every trace of the day. The old garage was lit again. The fluorescent tube buzzed, its pale light spilling across the grease and metal dust. On the workbench, the Barrett .50 stretched out, its scarred steel body reflecting each beat of Sarah's heart. She set the silver hard drive down beside the rifle, two heavy, silent objects bound by the same fate. Her fingers traced the faint engraving, TFPHANTM, her hand trembling though her eyes were sharp as a blade. For years she had cleaned the rifle just to forget. But now, every movement was no longer a dull ritual, it was preparation. The worn cloth slid along the barrel, slow, deliberate strokes. The faint smell of gun oil mixed with the tang of rust, pulling her back into memories of countless night watches. Sarah let out a dry, bitter laugh, mocking herself. Maybe this is the longest love I've ever had, a Barrett and the ghosts that refused to sleep. Outside, the world kept spinning, people buying, selling, loving, living, oblivious that in a small garage lay a truth powerful enough to crack the foundations of government. Sarah knew she no longer had the luxury of deciding what to do. The makers of the kill list would not stop, and with Jason alive, with this evidence now in her hands, the truth could no longer be buried. She locked the Barrett's chamber, the metallic click ringing through the space like an iron vow. In that moment, Sarah felt she wasn't just arming a rifle, she was arming her soul. Phantom had never disappeared. It lived on, in blood, in memory, and now, in the fire of justice rising within her. Jason sat quietly behind her. His eyes caught the dim light, lined with hardship yet bright with hope. He had returned from the dead only to pass the torch, and Sarah understood. If she faltered, if she turned away, Phantom would die again, this time, forever. Sarah rose, stepping to the garage door. Beyond it stretched the vast night, silent as a black sea. She drew in a deep breath, the cold air filling her lungs, reminding her she was still alive, still capable of choosing. If justice won't come from above, the words echoed in her mind like a final command, then we'll have to bring it from below. No speeches, no flags. Sometimes justice began with nothing more than a rifle, a hard drive, and two survivors. The imagined camera lens froze on Sarah's face. Her eyes, steel hard and unflinching, no longer belonged to a woman hiding in a dusty garage. They were the eyes of a warrior, the last soldier of Task Force Phantom, carrying the fire of justice that the entire system longed to extinguish. The garage door shut behind her. The darkness swallowed her silhouette, but not her resolve. A new covert war was beginning, not on desert sands, but in the heart of America, where truth and lies tangled like barbed wire. And one final question hung heavy, inescapable. Would Sarah have the strength to set the truth ablaze, or would Phantom's flame once again be smothered by the shadows of power? And you, my dear audience, brace yourselves for the next twist in this jaw-dropping story. So, before you get too cozy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you're truly loving what I'm doing here. And drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always a thrill to see who's joining us from all corners of the globe.